My name is Lance Conrad, and I'm an author. I write books for a living. I went from crawling to sprinting. Now I could run through not just one world, but many. Live not just one life, but hundreds.
He wants to marry her. He'll have to come to Tetron.
How about a nice spoiled cousin who bullies him all the time, right? What if these two characters fell in love? What if these two characters fought to the death? Show me him standing up against an entire army single-handed. And drove most of the race before hopping out to run the last one. That's a little bit different. True story, by the way. Somebody went on a trip or somebody came into town. There's your plot. I took that big old forehead and just crashed every brick, board, and brother in the house. Let me tell you a story. This is Word of the Day Story Stream, where we get together and tell stories. And this is going to be our best one ever. I'm joined, as always, by Mike, the co-writer for Word of the Day, and also very relevant to today's topic, also a, what would you call, aerospace engineer?
Yes.
Nice. And we also have with us Cody from Cody's Lab, who is, let's see, a geologist by training, but most of all I would describe him as a mad scientist. And also, very key to this topic, he's the sort of person who actually goes out and builds things. Anyone who's ever watched his channel know that he builds things, which is really, really cool. We're actually going to run into another Cody-like character in this segment, which is going to be lots of fun. Now, Cody, my understanding is you already had, from a very young age, a desire for lighter-than-air flight. Would that be accurate?
Yes. Growing up, I produced balloons, and I would release them. Occasionally, I would tie a camera to it.
Now, how big of a balloon are we talking?
I think the biggest one I made, I took a couple of space blankets and taped them together. And, that one floated up, and I got reports from people that, live down in town that they saw it floating overhead.
So, if you were having any reports of UFOs around that time, we found it. Now, say, how do you go about making a balloon? Most people are like, oh, yes, when I was a kid, I made myself a balloon. What even gave you that idea, or how did you make this balloon?
So just something to hold a lighter-than-air gas, so it would float up, and, plastic bags, regular balloons, the latex kind, things like that.
Nice. How high did it get? What was your highest one that you ever got?
My goal was about 9 miles for the
9 miles high?
The space blanket balloon. What I did is, see, as balloons rise...
Hold on. We need context. How old were you at this time?
I'm not sure if I should say, just in case I'm not under the statute of limitations.
It's okay. Everyone watching will keep the secret. Yeah. So under 18?
Oh, definitely. It was before I did YouTube.
Before you did YouTube. What was it, under 15? It was, wasn't it? That was a yes laugh, definitely.
It might have been around 10 to 13.
Oh, wow. Might have been. Couple deniability there. Might have been around 10 years old when he was sending balloons 9 miles into the air. Oh, man. That is awesome.
Well.
So this is the kind of driving, almost reckless curiosity that drove Dirigibles in the first place. All right, now we'll pop it over to Mike for how did we get from? I guess I don't even know where it was from. How did we start floating? Where did that all start?
Okay, the basic physical principle, the mathematical principle that drives aerostatic flight, which is lighter than air flight, right? So balloons, dirigibles, airships, That's all aerostatic. The math behind that was actually discovered in ancient Greece, like everything is, with our old friend Archimedes. The whole story of him being stuck on a particularly difficult problem, going to the bathhouse, realizing the result, and then running naked through the streets, screaming, "Eureka, Eureka, I found it." What he discovered was what we now call Archimedes' principle, which is that if you displace a fluid, like water in the case of Archimedes in his bathtub, or air in the case of a lighter-than-air craft, that there is an upward force generated that is equal to the weight of the displaced fluid. So, for example, the average person displaces a certain amount of air, right?
Some of us more than others.
Some of us more than others. The air that you displace, right, is the amount of air that you displace is the amount of upward force that is acting on you at all times, pushing you upward so that the air can get back to where it was.
So now that we have that bit of information, if you take a ton of lead and a ton of feathers and you weigh them, weigh them out, weigh a ton, and you put them in a vacuum chamber, take out all the air. Now which one weighs more, the ton of lead or the ton of feathers?
Oh, I hadn't thought about that, right? That's the question that every middle school science teacher uses to trick their students. Which weighs more, a pound of lead or a pound of feathers? And it's like, they're the exact same. But they're not, are they?
If you weigh them first in the air and then you put them in a vacuum chamber, the feathers were displacing air, so that amount of weight was removed from them.
So you lost all the buoyancy from all the air that the feathers displaced.
So now when you put them in the vacuum chamber, the feathers gain more weight than the lead does. So now
because it was
the
more
ton of feathers
buoyant.
is more.
There you have it, kids. Which weighs more, pound of lead, pound of feathers? Pound of feathers.
Yeah. Or, hang on. Well, that's gonna keep me up at night, actually. But you have buoyant forces acting on you at all times. But for people, it's pretty small. For an average person, you're experiencing a buoyant force from the air around you of about 2.5 ounces. So not nearly enough to counteract the weight of your body. 2.5 ounces, by the way, is about half the weight of a baseball or the weight of 3 AA batteries. That's how much the air around you is pushing up while it's trying to take your place.
If you go to a higher altitude, your weight will increase slightly.
Yeah.
Actually
yes, exactly.
increases more than the decrease due to the lower gravity.
Interesting. So yeah, that's the basic principle here, is you are displacing a fluid. The weight of that fluid that you're displacing is trying to get back there and is pushing up on you. So it was actually in 1670 that a monk named Francesco Lana de Terzi had this idea of what if we could take and make a ball and suck all of the air out of it, because vacuums had just been discovered. Not vacuum cleaners, but the actual, what's his name? Gurica something. A scientist had discovered that you could pump air out of things and that it would hold stuff together. He discovered vacuum forces. This monk had the idea, what if we could make a whole bunch of great big balls that were just full of nothing? Then the buoyant force from those could pick up and carry a ship. And he actually drew out diagrams and plans to build this ship back in 1670.
Oh, dang.
Because he didn't know that if you made a very thin copper ball and actually pumped all the air out of it, it would collapse.
Yes.
Because they weren't actually able to generate very strong vacuums.
We still can't do the whole vacuum idea. There are
that's
no
still
vacuum
not really
dirigibles.
plausible.
I am
But-
working on a
and we can talk
vacuum
about
balloon, but I'm going to have to put it in a pressure chamber with a gas probably other than air.
Oh, interesting. It
Okay,
is
never
actually...
mind. Cody's working on the vacuum dirigible.
Quick sidebar.
Might work on Venus.
There is actually research going on right now about carbon fiber partially evacuated balloons, so that you would get the benefits of buoyant lift, but you would also partially evacuate it to give you even less air on the inside.
Okay, but that's the future.
Yeah.
That's the future.
We're
still
getting
dealing
to
with
that.
the past.
We got to start at the beginning, everybody.
So, 1670, 17th century, we've got monks dreaming about flying boats carried by vacuums.
Right. So this is before the Revolutionary War.
Yes.
Okay. So it's just picture that, and you've got people already picturing vacuum balloons.
Yes. Over 100 years later, two brothers figure out how to actually make it work. The Montgolfier brothers. They make a balloon out of sackcloth and paper. So this tells you the level of technology that we are operating at. It's sackcloth and paper, and it's just smeared with stuff. And they put hot air in it, and it takes off. And they go and tell the king about it, King Louis XVI of France. He offers them two convicts to send up in the balloon.
Didn't they end up with a sheep or something?
Yes. Instead of the convicts, because the Montgolfier brothers were not monsters, they decided to send up a sheep, a duck, and a rooster.
Was that just like what animals they had close nearby?
I guess
Just-
so,
Why would they pick animals that can already fly?
except for the sheep.
Say, Cody, what's going on out in Nevada? You got a lot of flying sheep out there, do you?
You do have interesting experiments going on.
I've seen them go over cliffs. It's not pretty.
Well, a lot of things fly in that case. So, they take and send up these animals, and the king is very impressed. The court is impressed, and it sets off this balloon mania all over the world that sucks everyone in, including George Washington. Everyone in the world is super excited about lighter than air travel, about finally being able to fly. It is a reality, right? And they attempt all of these incredible stunts to fly balloons to far off places, and they start doing balloon races, which weren't really, who gets there first, but who can go the very farthest in a balloon before it comes back down. And all over the world, everyone is very, very excited about man finally being able to fly. Until they realize there is no way to steer a balloon. Right?
At the mercy of the winds.
You can't really put out sails that make any kind of sense. A rudder is mostly useless.
Kind of
Rowing
cool,
is useless.
When you're on a balloon, there's no wind. Like, it's not windy at all because you're moving with the wind.
I had not thought of that either.
That's
Like, if you're sitting on a hot air balloon, you could actually have a birthday cake with candles, and they might flicker a little bit because it's differential, but they just...
Well, now I want my next birthday on a hot air balloon, clearly.
I know, that's one of my goals.
that is really cool. But it is also really scary because what they quickly discovered was that if you go up in a balloon and the line tying you to the ground snaps, or if you intentionally cut it loose, which a lot of people did, where you end up is anybody's guess. So you had all of these really great adventure stories of people like drifting out into the wilds and like being rescued by Indians and becoming an honorary member of the tribe before hiking their way back to civilization. Some of these stories really did happen, and they were amazing, and everybody wanted to have that experience, but most people ended up falling to their drowning.
Do I get to be a god?
Yeah. Turns out if you pick a random spot on the globe, you're probably going to drown in the ocean.
Yes, that's going to be a common theme that comes out throughout talking about airships. Talking about aerostats, talking about lighter than air travel. A lot of people drown because because they try to stay over water so that if they do crash land, that there's something relatively soft underneath. But then the issue
And then the
is
balloon
that,
comes down. Oh.
yeah, you don't know where you're going to land or how far away from land that might be. You're trying to carry as little as possible, so generally the gear that they had with them was minimal. So a whole bunch of people start dying, and balloons quickly go out of fashion. So they have to wait until they figure out how to make them drivable. Or, in French, dirigible.
Or how we said, dirigible.
Dirigible. There it is.
Is that where that comes from?
Yes,
Yeah.
dirigible literally means steerable. Right? These
know
were the
that.
steerables because all of a sudden, for the first time, you could actually take off from a place and land at the same place, which for them was just mind-blowing stuff, where you had this, geography roulette that would happen if you just took off in a balloon.
So they started trying some things. For starters, they got rid of the round balloons because they were especially bad about just being picked up by the wind and they're off and away and nobody ever sees them again. They switched to the elongated cigar-shaped balloons, and they start trying to put an engine in it. Because the best way to get to where you want to go is to be able to just push yourself using a great big fan or a propeller. But at this point, we're still at the point that I've told you in the story, we're still dealing with steam engines.
Yes.
Which are huge.
Did they ever do the pedal-powered
and
thing?
heavy. They tried. They failed. It was sad. Because what they discovered as well was that once you get up into the air, the wind goes faster and faster the higher you go.
Usually, yeah.
Yeah. So they had this issue of working, just using manpower to do it. You couldn't overcome the wind. Even on a very calm day, you get up a ways, and just the what would have been passing breezes on the ground are enough to take you completely off course. They start trying to put on steam engines, and you have the issue of you put on this giant steam engine, and so you have to have a giant balloon, and now that giant balloon is acting as a giant sail that is dragging you with the wind more than the engine can handle. And so that brings us up to the late 1800s. People have been trying to figure out dirigibles for any meaningful application for 100 years-ish. When enters the scene a particular determined career soldier that I'll let Lance tell you about.
Excellent. So yes, who we are talking about, and I took the time to find the exact name because it's usually shortened. We are talking about Count Ferdinand Adolf Heinrich August Graf von Zeppelin.
Yeah, I'm shortening that to Fred.
Heck yeah. Yes. Or Fred for short. Fred to his friends. And so he creates the vast Fred airship line. And once again, we have an odd tie-in to America. He was there as a military observer during the American Civil War.
Yes.
Right? This is kind of where it gets started, is because during the Civil War, we were already using hot air balloons as scouts. Right? You just get a hot air balloon, you reel them up on a rope. They say, oh, look, the Confederates are right there. Reel me back down in a hurry, please. Right? Cedric in the chat says Fred Zeppelin. That's exactly what we came up with before the show. Yes, this was Fred Zeppelin. And yes, very successful militarily, but then makes the mistake of criticizing the military leadership. And so he is forced into retirement. It's still an honorable retirement, right? They let him keep his title, and he gets a fair pension. But he's now out, and this is a very patriotic man, right? He wants Germany to rise and to conquer, probably not realizing just how that would go in the future. But for him, that is still the future. And it bugs him. So he's seen this. He's actually taken a ride in a hot air balloon. Loved it. That was fun. And most of all, remember who it was that was making these, I don't know how you said it in French, dirigibles, right? It was the French.
Yes.
Right? This is like the arch enemy of Germany are the French, and they're getting up there. We need to get up there. Okay? And this is where I say Zeppelin was a bit like Cody. Okay? He wasn't necessarily a trained engineer or even scientist. He was a soldier, but he had this will to win and to create. And he starts out not with little simple experiments. He starts out full scale. Already starts with this giant Zeppelin thing, which, like I said, I could absolutely see you doing, Cody.
It's on my list.
This is not my surprised face.
He
For
also
those that don't know me.
he also had this habit. He would work up a design. He would take it to a group of people to look at. So like the War Ministry, or like a group of engineers, or a scientific meeting, and he would take it to them, and they would say, "This is not feasible." And he would just take it back and take it to a different group until someone said, "Oh yeah, this could work," and they would say, "I told you so! I told them all!" And that's how he did through failure after failure after failure. He just kept going until he found more compliant experts.
Yes, he actually started with an actual scientist. I think the guy's name was Gross. And yeah, when the guy started to come back with, "This isn't going to work," Zeppelin fired him. He was like, what did he say? He said he was an obstacle to my progress or something like that.
Sounds like something he would say.
Facts. Anyways. And Zeppelin is a perfect example of someone failing forward. Because all these ships that he makes, they fail. They get picked up by a windstorm and destroyed, or they catch on fire, and all these things just get destroyed. He has to pull more and more from public funding, always trying to get something that's viable for the military, specifically. And finally, he gets one that stays in the air a whole, let's see, the French had done 3 hours, right? And he put a balloon up that stayed up there for 12 whole hours, right? Just hung up there. And this all of a sudden sparks off another German fervor of excitement over this thing. But the military says, you need to show us a flight where you stay in the air 24 hours, right? They double his best time and say, you need to show us that before we will place a single order. He tries, has engine trouble, sets down in a place, but, still elevates, so it's still working. While he is inside eating dinner, a storm comes, picks the thing up, slams it on the ground, and it burns. And that, honestly, it was like one of his greatest failures. And yet, this unites the people of Germany behind him. And in one of the largest scale crowdfunding, this was people, right? All of a sudden, school children are sending him money, and workers and everything. And all of a sudden, he gets some like 4 million marks to build this thing. And all of a sudden, he's flush. It was at the time. Holy smokes, yes.
Yeah.
And yeah, so he essentially loses his military contract, loses everything. And like I said, the guy just keeps succeeding with every failure.
And it wasn't just money either. It was one guy sent to him and said, "Hey, I've got huge amounts of this new exciting metal, aluminum. that I would like to gift to your program. Another, two guys that he ended up meeting up with actually pretty early on in the process, but they were all excited to work with him because they had this new gasoline-burning engine that they wanted to get on board with the Zeppelin, and maybe we can put our new gas-burning engines, experimental gas-burning engines on airships. Maybe that's an exciting path forward for this new invention. He keeps, just by virtue of being in the public eye, he keeps getting new supporters and new avenues of progress just kind of by being very famous
by being
very determined. I hesitate to call him charismatic because by all accounts he was awful to be in a room with for any length of time. He was this very abrasive individual, but he was very determined, and people gravitated to that.
Yes. So he kind of won over the German people, and then the Kaiser, when he saw that the people were on board, said, okay, we need some of these for the military. Now, to be clear, they still had not actually made this thing work, right? They still didn't have any success, but you had such this public groundswell of support that the Kaiser was like, yep, we need Zeppelins, dang it. And so, and then, of course, we're on our way up. They actually start some passenger runs between wealthy German cities, right? Essentially doing joy rides for the elite. Most of those crash, but no fatalities. 0, right? So he's still failing, but nobody died, right? So,
yeah, it's worth noting that that at the same time there is this technological arms race going on between aerostatic flight and aerodynamic flight, airships and airplanes. Zeppelin has his first flight in 1900, right? The Wright brothers have their first flight in 1903, and they proceed to kind of race to see who can become the viable form of air travel for the next 40 years. The Wright brothers and other airplane aviators also have a lot of crashing. A lot more people die there, though.
airplanes had a lot higher body count.
Airplanes had a pretty big body count.
Higher.
So they keep going back and forth with the airships being like, no, we're the safe ones, the airships being like, we're the safe ones. Look, this is flying in luxury.
Crashes slowly.
Yeah, survivable crashes. All right, sorry. Even today, airplane crashes are not very survivable.
No.
But yeah, like I said, it's kind of having this slow but steady rise as they're working out the kinks, and then World War I, the Great War.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, I think the Army had ordered like 4 or 5 Zeppelins. All of a sudden, they need dozens, right? And all of a sudden, you've got the full weight and everybody looking at Zeppelin saying, create this. And he is all for it, right? This was his dream from the beginning, right? The Kaiser wants them mostly for surveillance, but Zeppelin is like, we must bomb them, right? This is what he's been going for 20 years. It took him 20 years of, like I said, almost pure failure, somehow just failing upward all the time, until finally he has this chance, and he says, no, we can bomb Britain from the skies. Kaiser actually waits on it because the Kaiser was actually cousins with the British king, right? This was still at the beginning of World War I, where you had like the people coming out of the trenches to play soccer during the Christmas miracle or whatever, and things like that, when it was still nice and didn't get to be absolutely horrifying. And Zeppelin kind of helped make it more horrifying because, sure enough, they come and they start dropping bombs on Britain. And here you have the propaganda machines of both countries with the same goal, right? Kind of like what happened with Poland in World War II, right? The Nazis took over Poland, and the Allies wanted to show that the Nazis were scary, and so they say that Poland was, conquered overnight. We need to take this Nazi threat seriously. And the Nazis were saying, we conquered Poland overnight, and this is how mighty we are. So they're like both agreeing on this lie. Poland actually did an amazing resistance job. It was just buried by both sides. But yeah, we kind of have the same thing with Zeppelins, where you have the Germans saying, these are mighty, terrible war machines. And you have the British saying, these are terrible war machines. They called them baby killers, right? And we're using it to drive public sentiment against the Germans, right? Because they were dropping these down.
Imagine being on the balloon when it releases the bomb. Because the balloon would get lighter and it just shoot up.
Let me make that more terrifying for you, okay? Because, yes, imagine being on a balloon, you drop and the balloon goes up. What if you weren't actually on the balloon, Cody? What if you were just dangling by a rope hundreds of feet below the Zeppelin?
Like walking on the ground, or?
Let me tell you a story.
The bomb's coming.
Oh, no.
So the British, to answer this great Zeppelin threat, come up with incendiary ammunition. Okay? Because Churchill was like, they're just big gas bags. They actually called them just big floating gas bags. We'll just shoot them down. So they sent planes up, shot them. Nothing happened. They could take regular fire. And had mounted machine guns where they just shoot down the planes.
This is something I discovered in my own testing. Like, if you have a balloon that's not under pressure, if it's just a sack, you can put a lot of bullet holes in it, and it just sits there and floats. Takes a long time for the gas to leak out.
Boom! Because of that. Guys, we have a dream team here today. I am so dang excited about this. We have the history, the technical, the actual experience. I just want to pause and say I am loving this so much.
I think I do have a few videos where I was trying to shoot down a balloon.
Where you were trying to shoot down the balloon?
Yeah. Okay. Long time ago.
Helium balloon or hydrogen balloon?
Hydrogen.
Oh, wow. That's very exciting.
I think what I did a few times was the balloon, just a big plastic bag, and I tied some paper to it, lit the paper on fire, let the balloon go, and I shot at it a few times. Didn't do anything, but once the paper burned, then it caught
nice.
fire.
But yes, the British come up with incendiary ammo that will go in and then explode, and so all of a sudden you're having Zeppelin shot down, which is no good. Then the Germans, again led by Zeppelin, come up with high-altitude Zeppelins.
Yes.
So high that they can go above the cloud cover and lower an observer in a little, I'm going to call it a basket.
You are correct. It was called, okay, I know this. It was called the spy basket.
Yes, the spy basket. They lower somebody on a spy basket below the cloud cover with a telephone to say, now, drop the bombs now.
But the bombs are like, what do they do about them, like, going next to them? They just...
I'm assuming it was a dangerous job. But yeah, you brought up a very good point earlier. Is like, also, you're there in your little spy basket saying, okay, go. But they're also about to drop, I don't know, what, 20, 30 tons of ballast? So yes, I'm assuming
it's dropped because you get yanked upwards.
Yeah, so this guy's going to have bombs raining down on both sides of him while the sky yanks him towards the heavens. So that must have been fascinating.
Yeah. Remember that in World War I, balloons were used a lot because the Western Front was primarily an artillery war. And so you would send up balloons and they would spot for artillery. the Zeppelins were too big, too cumbersome for that. They weren't actually as good of bombers as the airplane bombers, and they could only go over to Britain at night as sort of stealth bombers, or going up so high that their crew actually had altitude sickness and was actively freezing to death. There were a lot of downsides to the Zeppelins, but they were these great, big, black, horrifying monsters from the heavens, and that's what they were good at. They weren't actually that good at bombing. They weren't that good at surveillance, but they were very good at psychological warfare.
Scary.
Absolutely. Anyways, but then World War I ends. Like I said, the Zeppelin threat is largely countered by aerodynamic flight, right? Airplanes becoming more and more viable, so they're able to shoot down the Zeppelins. But then World War I ends, and we have the rest of the world kind of ganging up on Germany. All right, the Zeppelin company says, hey, no problem. We've had a lot of this. We're just going to make commercial flights, right? We'll go domestic. And the world says, no. We will, however, take your designs.
May I suggest that before we get into post-World War I, that we take just a second to answer some questions.
Okay. We did have one pressing question that's been here from the beginning. Cody, what is your cat's name? People wanted to know.
I think we decided on Budcat Rover.
Budcat Rover. There you go. All right, we have a question from the Mechanist. How did the Zeppelin even move against the wind? Who wants this
That's
one?
the powered flight, right? The propellers.
Yes.
Push them along.
At this point, they had motors strong enough to challenge even high-altitude winds. So yeah, it was overcome by pure brute force. We did not discover some magical thing that let Zeppelins ignore drag or air pressure. We overpowered it.
Exactly.
Which is cool.
Like trying to read the chat. I think I got too close to a fire and partially melted my glasses.
All right, from Lauren Baxter, we have a question directed at Cody, but we'll see what could the engines of the time handle?
I think you were talking about the 1800s.
Oh,
Oh, was that back in the 1800s?
pretty sure they had like diesel engines. and
Like
stuff.
They
steam
were
engines?
big. If we're talking about the 1800s, right? In the late 1800s, we actually started getting into first electrical motors, interestingly enough, but they were very low horsepower. And then towards the end, you started getting like the Otto engine, OTTO engine, which was an internal combustion engine, and then the Daimler engine from the company that would later become BMW. Yeah. So, towards the very end, you start getting like internal combustion engines and things like that. Earlier, it was just steam engines. Now, steam engines can generate a massive amount of power. Like, as far as just straight horsepower, it's an incredible amount that they were able to actually crank out. But the issue is your power to weight ratio. And the best that they could do, okay, this is numbers, so I'm going to have a hard time remembering anything remotely exact. But the best they could do was somewhere between, on the order of 100 to 1,000 to 1. Right? So you're looking at 1,000 pounds for 1 horsepower.
Oh, dang.
Right?
Yeah, that's lousy.
Down to towards the end, as things were getting better, to like 100 pounds for 1 horsepower. But you run into the issue of, well, okay, we need more horsepower. Well, and you're also adding a lot more weight as you go.
Like the balloon bigger.
Yeah, it wasn't until we started doing, electrical motors got us down to like 15 to 1. And then the Daimler engine actually flipped things, so you started getting multiple horsepower. No, actually. I'm getting my units of measure all messed up. But brought things even lower so that you could actually carry enough engine to move you around. So
Yeah.
We have very minimal notes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
A lot of
didn't
this is
pick
about
that
the
one up.
stories and the theories, so if you're looking for exact stuff, we might have to come back and answer those later. Oh, there was something that somebody near the bottom brought up. I'll have to find that later. Oh, there we go. AJ of Mars says they use cow stomachs for the gas bladders, right? Yes. Yes, they did. It was called gold beater skin.
Oh, that's because they use it to make gold leaf.
Yes, they did. You get it? Yes, absolutely. If you take the small intestine of a bull,
Does it have to be a bull?
they preferred bulls. I don't know. I imagine when they got into mass production, they took any cow they could. But you take some lye, some nice potassium hydroxide, and use that to treat it, scrape it clean. You create a thin, virtually unrippable substance. Okay? And yeah, it was called gold beater skin because, yeah, you would use it for creating gold leaf. You would stack this gold beater skin and gold and then hammer it all down and actually create, all of your gold leaf. And yeah, when Germany started this, all of a sudden, all the gold beater skin in the world essentially was gone. They took the entire supply. Because, yes, these Zeppelins were absolutely using this gold beater skin, this cow stomach.
They didn't really have plastic polymers then, did
They didn't. And apparently that is, it works incredibly well. And so, yeah, they used that, and I think it was something like, it was something like 20,000 cows or 200,000 cows to create a Zeppelin.
I mean, we probably kill that many cows in a day just for hamburgers and stuff, right?
Yeah, it's not like the small intestines were a really sought-after item anyways, but all of a sudden, Germany was buying all of the cow intestines from Germany and any country that would sell them, cow intestines. So that was a very odd... AJ, I believe it's AJ of Mars. Thanks for bringing that up because I'd actually forgotten about that. So I'm glad we stopped for questions, Mike, because that was beautiful. Anyways,
So I saw someone asked about the lead Zeppelin that the Mythbusters made. I wanted to talk on that as the bigger you make the balloon, the less surface area relative to the internal volume you have. Like if you take some dice, you have one die, it's got one unit on each side, and you want something that's twice as big, you add another dice to it. That's not a cube. You have to add 8 dice to make a cube.
right.
So you double the surface area, but you multiply the internal volume. If you double the radius, you multiply the internal volume by a factor of 8.
Indeed.
So the surface goes to 4, the internal volume goes to 8. And if you triple it, the surface area goes to 9, and the internal volume goes to 27. So the bigger you can go, the lighter it is relative to the skin.
If you can go big enough, because they're not increasing the same thing. Like I always think of it in terms of the sphere equations. Right? If you go with the surface area of a sphere, it's being multiplied by r squared.
Right, exactly.
If you go with the volume, it's 4/3 pi r cubed. Right? So every time you add radius, your surface area is only squaring, whereas your volume is cubing. So the bigger you get, you're always winning that as long as your materials can handle it.
So it's entirely possible to make a balloon out of metal.
Yes. And the Russians attempted it.
Yes.
It was a Dr. Schwartz, who's a Polish engineer who was living in Russia, when this whole, like, dirigible arms race was going on between Germany and France. Well, kind of. It hadn't really gotten that far. Schwartz goes to the Russians and says, I can make you a dirigible using this new wonder metal, aluminum.
So I've made aluminum balloons using the aluminum foil, and
Nice.
like get it fairly large, and then when you fold it over, lap it and add a little bit of JB weld to seal it real well. I've gotten balloons to float for months because the metal is really good at stopping the gases from leaking out.
It's true. Aluminum does. When you talk about gas escaping, and that's one of the issues that you run into with a balloon, with an aerostat, is that your lifting gas is trying to escape. Aluminum is very good at resisting that. But this Dr. Schwartz did not try to do lifting gas cells inside of the balloon.
Oh yeah,
He filled the whole balloon with hydrogen
that's not such a good idea though.
in the middle of the Russian winter.
Oh no.
And when you change, are we still streaming?
We're still streaming.
Okay. When you're expanding and contracting gases, and when things are very cold, some interesting things happen. Basically, his balloon imploded, destroying all of this very expensive aluminum, and he was chased out of the country by the secret police. Zeppelin
Hold it up and melt it down again.
Zeppelin was later accused of stealing pieces of his design from Schwartz. And Zeppelin was so offended that he was being compared to that crackpot that he challenged, I believe it was the Minister of War that had made the accusation, challenged him to a duel with heavy cavalry sabers. And it was only the Kaiser himself stepping in that stopped these two men from hacking each other to death over being compared to the guy that tried to build an aluminum balloon.
Oh man, Fred Zeppelin, that would have been so metal. If he had died in a heavy saber duel.
Yeah!
For his honor. Okay,
Anyway.
so I'll finish up World War or post World War I real quick, and then we need to get on to the Hindenburg and a lot more of Cody's stuff about like moving forward. Okay. So real quick, post World War I, we have everyone kind of fighting over Germany's intellectual rights because we just kind of steal it straight out. The British build their own Zeppelin, not fully understanding the design that they'd stolen. And so they build one of those high altitude ones, right? Like, oh, this is the best they had. Yeah, but it was never actually meant for low altitude stuff and turns in that thick air. It rips itself apart and crashes, and the British go, we're out. We're out forever.
I should mention when you go up in altitude, the pressure drops, right?
Yes.
So if you release a balloon, the balloon expands as it goes up. And if it expands enough, it'll pop. And so if you want a high-altitude balloon, what you do is you partially inflate it at the ground, and then as it goes up, it fully inflates. So imagine if you're on the ground with a balloon that's designed for high altitude, it's not going to be very rigid. So if you try to turn, exactly.
Yep, that's exactly what happened. They tried to take a sharp turn, and this high-altitude balloon, which was meant to only be viable at, ridiculous altitudes, just rips itself apart. The British say, we are out forever. But the Americans, in the meantime, and the Americans have an interesting thing going on where they have all of a very special material, an alternate lifting gas called helium, which we're going to get to here in, well, I don't know. Should we get to it now?
Let's talk about lifting gases real quick because it's going to be important when we get to the Hindenburg.
Because that's modern. That's what they always say is, oh, well, hydrogen's flammable, just use helium, right? Like it's that simple. Now, Cody, long as we got you, we're going to have to circle back to the Zeppelin, or sorry, to the Hindenburg.
Yes.
Because we can't have a night about dirigibles without going over the Hindenburg. But
It has to be addressed.
all right, Cody, like I said, a lot of your training is as a geologist, which kind of factors into this, and you have a lot of this other experience. Why can't we just have more helium? Why can't we just do helium instead of hydrogen on these vast scales?
So helium, as it turns out, is the second most common element in the universe after hydrogen.
Nice.
So why
Sounds
don't we
good so
have-
far.
So why don't we have very much helium down here on the Earth? You know,
Did it
the
all
s-
just float away?
The sun's got a lot of helium. Exactly. Helium is so light that it is able to escape the planets with low gravity. Jupiter is big enough that it's able to hold on to its helium, but Earth is not. So if you think about gas molecules as little particles, which they are, if you send one off at the average velocity, so if you have an oxygen molecule and you have it go up about 300 meters per second is the average velocity of gas molecules in the air, it's going to go up, and as long as it doesn't hit anything else, it'll lose speed just like a bullet fired up. 300 meters per second, it's going to fly up for about 30 seconds before it reaches the apex. Something like 4 kilometers in altitude it would gain, but it would come back down.
Okay.
Helium is, for the same energy, it moves about 3 times as fast. You know, the 1/2 mv squared, the m is about 1/8 as much as an oxygen molecule. So-
Gotcha. Same energy, but a much lower mass, and so we've got a...
So helium is able to go much higher. Still not able to escape the Earth completely on average. You know, if you replace the atmosphere with helium, it'd still take a long time for the atmosphere to leak off. But
We'd be dead by then. Don't worry about
The
it.
gases at the very, because the gases don't all move at the average speed. The average speed is the speed of sound, but it's actually like a bell curve, a distribution of speeds. And the very end of the bell curve, the very tail end, that's where they're moving the fastest. For oxygen, there's very little going fast enough to actually escape the Earth, or to an altitude that the sun can then blow it off. Helium is much more likely to be able to get up high enough that the sun blows it away because of its lower mass. It's for a given energy, it's able to go much faster and reach escape velocity much more easily.
So you're saying that these light helium molecules just pop up high enough that solar winds just rip it off our planet and blow it out into space?
Exactly.
Jerk. Well, then my question is, why do we have any helium? Sounds like it would
Because-
just all go away.
The Earth is actually making helium. See, there's heavy elements in the Earth that decay. So if I have a piece of uranium ore here,
Of course he does.
turn my Geiger counter on, you might be able to hear it.
I was not told about this.
See,
Wow, that's the sound of radiation, boys and girls.
so I'm actually not even picking up the alpha particles coming off. That's the secondary radiation from the daughter products and the X-rays from the ions scattering. Alpha particles are very low penetrating. They can't even get out of this bag. If you could pick up the alpha particles, this would be screaming a lot louder.
Wow, so can I see it?
Yeah, it's safe to handle as long as you don't eat
So-
any of it.
You're telling me that inside this bag, we essentially have a bag full of alpha radiation that just can't get out?
Yeah, it's making a little bit of helium. If you had a really sensitive detector, you might be able to detect the buildup of helium inside that bag.
Okay, so how long? Never mind. This would all be math, but I'm assuming it would take a ridiculously long time
It would.
for this little rock to even fill this tiny bag with helium.
I did the math
assuming-
on it, and it probably produces about a milliliter of helium per million years for this
Okay,
rock that big.
a milliliter. For those of you trying to picture that at home, that is 1 cubic centimeter, a little bit smaller than a standard 6-sided die. And so we can get one of those every million years with Cody's rock here. How long would it take you to produce that much hydrogen using any method of your choice?
fractions of a second.
Fractions of a second. Yeah.
So hydrogen is lighter than helium. You'd expect the hydrogen to leave as well. But hydrogen is chemically reactive. Helium is not. So hydrogen binds to oxygen, which makes it heavier, and it like drags it down and keeps it on the Earth.
So all the hydrogen that's created goes up, reacts with the oxygen, and then rains down upon us, yes?
Literally.
Literally.
Science is so cool!
Although, most of the mass of the Earth's atmosphere that is being lost, you know, the flat earthers, they're always like, well, what's keeping the atmosphere down? Well, it's gravity. The particles, they can't get up. The gravity slows it down and brings it back.
Same thing keeping you down.
But the Earth does lose a little bit of gas. You know, it's constantly losing gas. And most of the gas that it loses is the lighter stuff like helium and hydrogen. So, like, if a pond full of algae makes a little bit of hydrogen gas, the hydrogen gas goes up, it doesn't react right away, it can actually leave the planet. So the Earth is losing tons of hydrogen every second.
Okay, so like I said, I want to return to the question, how do we have any helium at all then?
Right, so because we have the heavier elements, the uranium, which the unstable nuclei, you know, it's like a bubbling pot. The helium is a very stable configuration of 2 protons, 2 neutrons. And on, you know, this is a random process. You know, the nucleus is bouncing around, it's got all this extra energy. It'll kick off a little particle of the helium, it's the helium nucleus. The strong nuclear force will just pull it back. But occasionally it'll get just a little bit far enough away that the strong nuclear force isn't able to overcome the repulsive effect of the electrostatic force. And so the helium nucleus will shoot off at near the speed of light. Just shoot off, and then it'll crash into other atoms, pick up some electrons, and then become helium.
So you're telling me, so the other day, I had a helium balloon, right? And I breathed it in to do the funny voice for my son, who was traumatized, by the way. Not the point of the story, but he was just terrified of that, never doing that again. But you're saying that every single helium atom in there was at one time a radiation off of radioactive materials? That's awesome.
So, something just happened.
Oh, it's all good.
So, the way we're able to collect that gas over long periods of time is just co-produced with natural gas. So you've got natural gas, it's mixed with dirt, which has a little bit of uranium in it. The uranium decays, you know, turning radium, thorium, you know, down the decay series, producing helium along the way. And the helium mixes with the natural gas and then gets trapped in pockets or, you know, voids in the Earth.
So essentially, helium on the surface will jump into almost outer space and get ripped off by solar winds.
Right.
So the stuff that we have is literally trapped by the Earth's core, and we mine it?
Yes. You take it out and you extract it from the natural gas.
Okay. Yeah. During the time of the Hindenburg, which we were about to get into, the world had, I believe, a grand total of 2 helium vents. They didn't know how to mine for it, but there was actually a leaking of helium, and they were both in the United States. And the United States did not share. And yeah, the Hindenburg was actually designed to use helium. It was a helium-based design, and then the U.S. said, nah, ain't doing it.
Yeah, well, we even had some difficulties when we launched the USS Shenandoah, which was one of our big airships. We had to dedicate literally all of the helium that we had in the United States to this one project. We were using up a huge amount of helium for airships.
I don't know if we mentioned why we would use helium other than hydrogen.
Oh, yeah. Let's talk about lifting gases.
It's just helium's not reactive. I think I may have said
Yes.
That is, yeah, if anything, an understatement. Helium is not only not as reactive as hydrogen, it is the lightest noble gas. You can't react it to anything. Are there any exceptions to that, Cody? Do you know of any helium reactions?
Under
I know
certain
of
conditions
exceptions.
it might react with fluorine or something.
Yeah,
Everything reacts with fluorine.
I don't know, but yeah, you could not light this with a blowtorch. It would put out fires, right? So this is a perfect lifting gas, except for we cannot produce it. This is a limited thing that we have to mine. We could actually create it with more radiation, but you're talking, what, nuclear fusion on a ridiculous level?
Fusion reactors should be able to make helium.
Would they be able to produce it in large enough amounts to make me a floating sky island?
Probably not.
Anyway, back to hydrogen.
It would
Quick
still be
side note.
very expensive.
Okay, quick side note before we get back to lifting gases. You can, and we have, built entire complex molecules out of helium. You just have to simulate absolute zero.
Oh.
Because real absolute zero is impossible, but if you throw it in a hypervelocity molecular beam, you can create a directional absolute zero and build molecules out of noble gases.
What?
I mean, at
Anyway.
that point, you're just got a cloud of probability and quantum weirdness.
they exist for like fractions of a second, but okay, but lifting gases. So if we go all the way back to the Montgolfier brothers and their flying sheep, they were using hot air. Hot air is less dense than cold air, so it gets a buoyant force. Okay, that is our lowest level. And warm air is still going to try to escape through your balloon. Okay. So they figured out hot air doesn't actually generate very much of a buoyant force because it's not that different from cold air. So the next thing that they did was coal gas. And I don't know very much about coal gas, but Cody, you mentioned that you know something about what it is.
Oh, the coal gasification.
Yes.
So, coal is made of lots of complex molecules, mostly carbon and hydrogen. You heat it up, those break apart into simpler molecules, so you end up with a gas that is primarily carbon monoxide and hydrogen gas. If you take that mixture of coal gas, it's lighter than air, because carbon monoxide is about the same density as air, but hydrogen is lighter. So
On average, it's lighter than air, and you're good to go. And
so you could just take a piece of coal, or even wood, and have it enclosed without oxygen, heat it up, and collect the gases that come off. You put that in a bag, and it'll float. It's lighter than air.
wow.
So that was the next lifting gas that we used, was coal gas, which is a little bit dangerous. It's a lot a bit dangerous because hydrogen itself is very, 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 very reactive to heat. It goes boom.
You can actually get away with breathing hydrogen. I wouldn't recommend it, but hydrogen itself is not toxic, so you could just breathe it just fine. But there is, like most commercial hydrogen is contaminated with small amounts of carbon monoxide.
Do they still produce it that way?
They use natural gas now.
But it's still that general coal gas type of production?
It's a little bit different because you're not just heating it up and breaking it down, because natural gas is already
It's already, yes, right?
You're combining it with water. And the carbon is more attracted to the oxygen than the hydrogen is. And so the water will react with the methane, producing carbon monoxide and hydrogen. You add more water, you can get the carbon dioxide, which you can scrub out, and then you just have relatively pure hydrogen. But there's still enough carbon monoxide that if you make it that way, It's not a good idea to breathe it in because the small amounts of carbon monoxide is very toxic.
So for
Yeah.
all of you at home who are planning on getting hydrogen and breathing it, don't do that.
Also, we may have mentioned hydrogen go boom.
Yes.
So you probably should only be playing with it in very controlled circumstances. So that was the next thing that they graduated to. Beyond coal gas was they were able to purify it to a certain extent, scrub it, as Cody said, to make a hydrogen.
So if I recall correctly, what they did originally is they used iron. So like if you have a box full of iron oxide, get that very hot, and you run your coal gas through it, the carbon monoxide form, and then so that makes a CO2, which can be scrubbed out, and then to regenerate your iron reactor, you just put some steam through it, and the steam reacts with the iron to release more hydrogen and to oxidize the iron to be reduced again by more carbon monoxide.
Wow. To get the carbon dioxide out, would you do like I'm going to use one of the only chemistry phrases I know now. Would you do like a pressure swing adsorption?
You'd probably just run it through lime water.
Dang it. One of my first jobs out of school, I designed a compressor for a company that was recycling heliox, which is helium and oxygen that is used by deep sea divers.
Okay,
because
I see what they're doing there.
Yeah, because the whole problem with deep sea diving is when you try to come back up, nitrogen bubbles form in your blood, and it feels like your bones are on fire, and then you die. So instead, they use heliox, and helium doesn't have as much of a problem with that
because it doesn't absorb or doesn't dissolve into water very easily.
Yeah. So yeah, we had these great big compressors to run pressure swing adsorption cycles, where you take a gas and you pressurize it onto a medium. In this case, I believe it was an activated carbon medium, and the molecules essentially, under high pressure, get stuck. And then you can vent away all the stuff you don't want, put on a negative pressure, and it pulls out those molecules.
I don't think they had
I
that
know chemistry things.
back in the oldie days, though.
Yeah. I actually love hearing the old processes. I love how people came up with this stuff. Now, real quick, we don't want to keep people too long. Right. I think we should deal with the Hindenburg and then talk about moving forward. Because, to be clear, everyone watching, I am personally vested in this. I absolutely want to retire to a floating sky island. Okay? That's what I want.
On Venus.
So, I'm fine if it's on Venus. I'm good with that. So, I do want to get to the future of dirigibles. And one thing that has stopped, damned the progression of dirigibles was the Hindenburg. That is when hydrogen became this horrifying ghost demon in the closet sort of thing. And all the research and everything stopped right there because of the Hindenburg. Now, to be clear, the Hindenburg had already done, 30-something transatlantic flights?
The previous year alone, it did 34 transatlantic flights.
Okay. And so,
right, so that was consistent. This was a very safe, reliable vehicle.
Okay. AJ of Mars just quoted, "Oh, the humanity."
Yeah.
Right? It is, almost 100 years later now, coming up on it anyways, and we still have this societal cringe about this. But really, I would make the point or the argument that it was not the Zeppelins that were the key innovation, the key invention there. It was television cameras, right? We already knew that there were people dying with airplanes and everything, but now we got to watch.
If it wasn't for that video, the Hindenburg crash might most people wouldn't even know about it.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Especially since there was, my numbers might be off just a tiny, tiny bit. There were 97 people on board. 36 people died.
Only 35 of whom were on board.
Yes, one was on
One
the ground.
was on the ground, and it landed on him.
Yeah. But again, you compare that to even modern aircraft. The idea of a survivability rate of a crash of, what, 60-something%? Yeah, where most people walked away, and even most of your fatalities were people who panicked and made bad decisions.
There's also a lot more people on a jumbo jet.
Yes, there are.
That's true.
There are. It's...
Okay, let's talk about... There are a few things. We are now talking about the end of the age of airships. Right? This is how it ends. The Hindenburg was just the last straw. Right? There were already a lot of things going on. One of them was the scarcity of helium made these giant airships not really all that viable because helium had become very expensive. There was the issue that more and more airships were seen as a German innovation, and more German meant fascist. Remember, this is 37 is when the Hindenburg happens. Airplanes are becoming safer and cheaper and faster and can go farther. And so airships are getting outcompeted. There is one more thing. The year before, the SS Akron, or the USS Akron, went down in a storm. The USS Akron was the U.S.'s first built-to-purpose flying aircraft carrier. Oh, it's so... I just love those words strung together. And it was really cool. It had planes inside that it would drop on this trapeze thing, and they would just fly away and go around and scout, and then come back and hook into this trapeze, and they would pull them back up into this Zeppelin. And the Akron was actually very famous, and it was this incredible piece of engineering. It actually flew over FDR's inauguration.
Oh, wow. I was not aware of that.
It was 785 feet long.
Oh, I'd love to see that.
That's more than 2 football fields.
Dang.
It carried 6.5 million square feet of helium.
Cubic feet?
Cubic feet of helium, and had a gross lift of 200 tons.
It's insane the tonnage that it could lift.
Yeah!
And is that even including the weight of the ship itself?
That's including the weight of the ship itself.
Okay.
But that still gives you a usable lift of a bunch.
So that's actually something I wanted to bring up. The air is actually pretty heavy. You don't feel it very much, but air has a lot of weight, especially when you have a lot of volume of it. If you have the Eiffel Tower, it's like 7,000 tons of steel. It's 300 meter tall tower. If you put a cylinder around it that would just enclose the entire tower, the air inside that cylinder would weigh 9,000 tons.
9,000 tons?
So the air in a cylinder around the tower weighs more than the steel structure of the tower.
What?
That is something I did not know.
Okay.
So, wow. That's distracting.
Sorry.
So the Akron was huge, and it was championed by Rear Admiral William Moffett. And he had this idea of a fleet of airships for the Navy. They would go around and do scouting, and they would do like radio relay and all of these things. And he was a big champion of airships for the military, even though they were now declining in civilian commercial use. He took a bunch of his friends, supporters, and some dignitaries up in the Akron, for it was a scouting trip, just a scouting exercise.
I feel like this isn't going to end well.
The weather goes bad. They lose visibility. And, the Akron crashes. Because they were trying to keep everything light, there were no life jackets on board.
Oh, no. How much does a life jacket really
Also,
weigh, people?
Because it's 785 feet long, in the storm, they lose level, right? It tips to about 30 degrees. When the back hits the water and starts coming apart, the front is still hundreds of feet above the waves. That's the issue of a craft this size.
Wow.
Is that it can already have crashed on one side and still have people on the other end of the craft fall to their deaths. There were 3 survivors of the 76 on board. Admiral Moffett was not one of them. So all of the people that had supported airships in the military go down in one massive accident. And it's a big deal at the time. It's a very big deal at the time. In fact, there were like songs written about it. Bob Miller wrote a song the next day commemorating the deaths on the Akron. But that did away with airships in the military. I mean, there were still a couple. You've got like the Ghost blimp in World War II and stuff. I guess that's a story for another day. So things were already going kind of poorly. Now we lose the military side of things. They're still trying to keep things going with flying the Hindenburg and a couple of other similar aircraft back and forth. They have like a constant route from Germany to Recife and then up the East Coast, Recife, Brazil, and then up the East Coast. And they're just doing, they're moving stuff. They're like carrying mail. They're importing Christmas trees to Brazil. Like they're doing some really cool stuff, but mostly they're just trying to keep investors on board so they can keep this thing alive. The Hindenburg is this luxury liner of the skies. It can move a bunch of cargo and still have enough to move dignitaries in comfort. Everything was absolutely top of the line. All of the utensils were aluminum, which was still very fancy at the time. Aluminum and, I kid you not, the very latest, never before seen plastic polymer.
Ooh.
And like Bakelite and stuff.
So only the very best.
Plastic furniture. It had never been seen before. They would do this trick where they would build like card towers and balance pencils on their racers at takeoff and landing because it was that smooth. And they were trying to sell it as, no, look how safe it is. Look how luxurious it is. We can make this work. Just give us the chance.
Cruise ship in the sky. Yeah, I like big boats. They're floating on air instead of water.
Yeah. There's actually a couple things I want to deal with real quick that have come up in the comments because people have talked about just, a Concorde for air travel. And, yeah, I think what he just brought up answers that perfectly. These are not slow airplanes. These are really fast ships that fly.
Fast boats.
Okay. Yeah, these are flying boats.
Like a speedboat can go 40 miles an hour. That's fast.
Oh yeah,
water.
that's crazy fast.
Yes, but the Hindenburg I think had a cruising speed of 50-something knots, so 60-something miles per hour. With I think there was another one that its cruising speed was up into the 80s miles per hour.
Like highway speeds today.
Yes, highway speeds. And you don't have to stop at red lights.
You can go straight line.
Because you're flying. So the Hindenburg is the last gasp of the airship industry, and it's gorgeous, and it's just so cool and luxurious. And so all of the hopes of the airship industry continuing are kind of hanging on the Hindenburg. It runs into stormy weather while it's coming in for landing in New Jersey. It has to detour over Manhattan. Do you know that?
Didn't they moor it to the Empire State Building or something?
The Empire State Building actually had moorings set up for airships. But no, not in this case. On the day that it went down, it detoured over New York, went like over Manhattan. People came out into the streets to look up at it, and like people got pictures. They actually sent up a plane to get footage of it from above, and it made a big PR splash essentially before coming into land. It comes into the moorings. You've got the ground crews there. They're bringing it in, and something happens. We still, to this day, don't know exactly what. But hydrogen got out of the cells, which hydrogen does that, but got out of the cells in quantities, and a spark was introduced. It took 40 seconds for the entire Hindenburg to go up in flames.
Part of that is actually the flame velocity of hydrogen is very high because of the lightweight molecule. It moves quickly.
Yes.
And also the ratio of hydrogen to oxygen you need for ignition is very... Like, you can have just a little bit of oxygen and a lot of hydrogen, and it'll still burn.
Yeah. So, bad things start happening immediately. They lose lift on one side. That tilts the Hindenburg. This makes the flames go, rather than up and out of the aircraft, go straight up through the balloon where the crew is. Right? The passengers are down in the gondola. The crew is up in the balloon. 13 crew members die. The rest are able to get down and get out. The passengers, some are trapped because they were old, or because they were infirm, or got trapped in their furniture when everything tilted. Others panicked seeing the flames and jumped and fell to their deaths. Why do I always do the depressing stories?
I don't know.
It is becoming my brand.
Yes, you always tell the really depressing stories.
And finally, there was one man on the ground trying to guide it, and the Hindenburg lands on top of him. Those that were not trapped and did not panic then just run out of the gondola onto terra firma and are fine. Most of the crew escapes. Most of the passengers escape. Of the 97 people on board, 35 are killed. Most of them the crew that were up in the balloon itself. So all in all, this is not... I don't want to say it's not that bad, but in terms of an aircraft crash, it's not that bad.
I believe even modern aircraft do not have the safety record that the airships did.
You think you gotta remember is that the airplanes we have today are loaded with jet fuel.
I'll say it's not like we don't already use incredibly flammable substance, but we can engineer past these things, especially with modern materials. Like I said, Zeppelins, we were still using cow stomachs.
Yes.
Okay, that was still a thing.
When we build our big ship, I think like aluminum foil would be good.
I'm down. I really think that there's... I'd love to know more about the possibilities of carbon fibers. And yeah, for those at home, there were some comments about blimps and Zeppelins. Blimps are more like a balloon, right? When they are not full of lifting gas, they're flat. A Zeppelin or an airship like we're talking about, whether it has gas or not, it still has the same shape.
Yeah, it has a
right?
skeleton.
It's actually got a skeleton, and then it has individual gas bags, bladders inside that fill up cells that fill up with lifting gas, and you are able to control your buoyancy by affecting how much those are filled up. And that also creates the opportunity for a lot of engineering safety into it. You have something you also wanted to say?
So they used a ballast like water to lower the weight to make it go up, and then they dump hydrogen to make it go down. And the fuel for the engines, I think the Hindenburg actually used like kerosene or something, but on some of the airships they actually use carbon monoxide because it's a flammable gas, but it has about the same density as air. So if you burn the carbon monoxide, the ship doesn't change in weight very much. So you can burn your fuel, but not have the ship,
But not change the weight.
not constantly have to dump hydrogen.
Nice.
Neat.
Nice. I love it.
Okay,
Go ahead,
so
Mike.
If we can get the
Hindenburg goes down in flames. It's the nail in the coffin because everybody sees this video. I actually hadn't seen it until today. The Oh the Humanity video, and it is far more upsetting than I was prepared for.
Yeah, it was just haunting. I think that's one of the things, like you said, there was a political angle to this because Zeppelins were German. They were very German. Even the Germans made it very German. I mean, it was named the Hindenburg, very German name.
Yeah, it was almost named the Adolf Hitler.
Oh, my.
no.
That's a true
Oh,
story.
my.
So
Yeah,
someone's
they had-
asking why you didn't burn hydrogen as fuel. That's because as you burn the hydrogen, the ship would get heavier.
There we go.
You're
Yeah,
losing
hydrogen reacting with oxygen makes water, and all of a sudden, yeah, you're increasing the weight of your ship.
Okay. Looks like we're having
Little bit of technical difficulties.
yeah, we're having some technical difficulties, and we are actually over time. Yeah.
1.5 hours.
So, yeah, that was kind of the end of the age of airships. We may still see airships again. Do we want to cover a little of the future, or should
Hey, we're
we
back.
wrap things up?
So
I absolutely want to cover some of the future,
Okay.
all right.
at least a little, because once again, I'll take point on this one and then kick it over to Cody.
What kind of future you want?
Well, I still want my private sky island, right? But like I said, there's this idea of Zeppelins or dirigibles being slow planes, but really they're very fast boats, and boats that don't need ports. These can go anywhere. They can just go down and drop off cargo. They can fly above a lot of storm systems, and this would revolutionize shipping, right? This is faster. It no longer needs a port. That would help a lot with a lot of your third world development, being able to connect it. It would make the world smaller. And so I really think there's a lot to that. Now, I say that hoping to sway public opinion about hydrogen, knowing that, yes, there was the Hindenburg, but we can engineer past that now in the modern age, and it would actually have a vast impact on our world. And I say all this knowing that what I really want is my private sky island. Or, let's be honest, I'd be fine with just being a sky pirate, right? Just come in with my Zeppelin over some poor, slow container ship, lower my...
Drop down, hook on.
I would straight up use one of those, like,
Be quiet.
arcade claws, just go down and just grab some containers and fly away.
So now if something like that happens, the authorities will know who to come after.
Come at me, bro.
A lot of sky to search.
A lot of sky.
See, they'll have a fighter jet come shoot you down.
So, it's international waters, right? Anyways,
There's no reason why they couldn't be autonomous.
Yes, that's the other thing is we've also had drone technology come a very long ways, and to the point now where you could have a worldwide shipping network and no actual human beings are in the air, and this is all being controlled remotely or by local on the ship AI essentially.
We didn't have to be using that.
We did have a couple of comments that asked that we deal with the possible thermite or tannerite conspiracy surrounding the Hindenburg, and that's one of the things that's brought up. A guy named, what was it, Bain?
Addison Bain.
Yeah, went back and he also wants hydrogen to make a recovery as a lifting gas, and so he went back and there's actually been studies of the Hindenburg about why it crashed, because it's very easy to say there was hydrogen and went boom, but he brought up this other theory that it was actually the paint, that they had iron oxide and aluminum, because aluminum helped keep everything in, and actually created thermite.
Yeah, it was called doping. The paint, as it were, that they put on the hydrogen cells to keep the gas in. It was iron oxide and aluminum something. Chemistry guys.
I haven't looked this up specifically.
Essentially, had iron oxide and aluminum together in the paint, and so you essentially had thermite paint, and that may have been where your spark came from, because really, like I said, these had a long safety record. It was all hydrogen. Even during the war, we were shooting them, and it was still fine, right? They leaked hydrogen, but it wasn't, this is not, gasoline on a match. This is just a gas, and for the most part, it disperses all upward. And so, we had this thing of maybe it was the paint, or this doping anyways, that kind of helped seal everything, that actually created that active ignition source. Though we, to this day, don't know where the spark came from, and we know it wasn't just the doping. Okay, the thermite, they have run tests on that. It wouldn't have done the whole 40 seconds thing. That needed the hydrogen. So it actually absolutely was the hydrogen igniting. But there was that whole question of why. Because I said we had these things flying in wars and being shot full of holes. They don't just explode all by themselves. And so, something had to drive that reaction and that flame.
Yeah, hydrogen flames are actually invisible.
Yeah,
so
that's the other thing. They're these
something
clear.
else is burning to give it the color.
Yeah, these flames were mostly red, which hydrogen, if you can see the flame at all, is a light blue color, mostly invisible. There was no smell of garlic. All the hydrogen in the Hindenburg had been scented to smell like garlic, which they talk about all the fine dining. I guess they didn't use garlic. Could you imagine getting your dish, right, freaking out? But none of the crew who were trained in detecting leaks, right? None of them detected any garlic smell at all. And so, this wasn't a regular occurrence. Something more happened than just, there was a hydrogen balloon, because they'd already taken care of all that. Like I said, the thermite, I think, is absolutely a solid contender for your initial spark and the heat of your flame to drive all that. But like I said, it doesn't quite solve all the problems. You need the hydrogen to ignite to really get that 40-second whoosh.
All right, so back to the future of airships. I think I wanted to talk about the balloons on Mars.
Heck yeah.
Right?
In fact, we even had a question in the chat. Somebody said, what about dirigibles on Mars or Venus? I think we should bring up other planets.
The carbon dioxide atmosphere is heavier than oxygen, the oxygen atmosphere. So you could actually use oxygen, breathable air, as your lifting gas.
Wow.
Nice.
But if you use hydrogen, it's even better. On Mars, the atmosphere is carbon dioxide. It's about 1% the pressure of Earth, But as for density, carbon dioxide is heavier, but it's also colder. So the balloon doesn't have to be, it still has to be quite a bit larger, but, visually looking at it, like a normal weather balloon that would float on Earth would also float on Mars.
Really? Okay.
Interesting.
All right. That is fascinating. I could have a private sky island on Mars, is what you're saying.
That'd be a big ship.
Heck yeah. Yes, it will be, Cody. It's going to be amazing. Now, what if I go on Venus?
It would be very nice because you pick the right altitude, you have pressure and temperature you have same as here on the surface of the Earth.
Nice. Nice. Now, how much engineering am I going to have to do to deal with the whole sulfuric acid thing?
Most of the sulfuric acid condenses down to lower elevations.
So we could... I know I'm jumping ahead here, but using dirigibles, could we then just colonize Venus, not the surface, but the upper atmosphere?
I don't see why not, other than it's just a really deep gravity well, and gravity wells are for suckers.
Quote of the night: gravity wells are for suckers. Okay.
I was going to say, sulfuric acid, its boiling point is about 300 Celsius. And so if you're up at an altitude where it's room temperature, the sulfuric acid is already going to be condensed out.
Nice. So we can fly above the sulfuric acid clouds and just like hang out on Venus.
I imagine it'd be just like being on the ocean. If you're going to colonize Venus, you might as well colonize the Pacific Ocean.
Nice. Like I said, that's kind of my whole idea of my sky island, right? I just take a spot of the Pacific, call it Conradia, and I just float above,
Get in
reigning from on high as king and emperor.
Like the South Pole gyre and just float around and around Antarctica.
Oh, yeah. By the way, one small thing. Mike, you talked earlier about hot air balloons not being pilotable, but there is a place in New Mexico, I think it's actually Albuquerque, that is incredibly popular for hot air balloon festivals because you can steer by adjusting your altitude. They have winds going around in such a way that you can essentially choose which wind stream you're using, and people have taken off, flown around the valley, and landed back in the same spot in a hot air balloon just by affecting height.
That kind of happened with my
was kind of cool.
Balloon that I sent off a couple of years ago. Like it went up, and like we were tracking it with the GPS. It went up over Colorado, and then came back as it went up to the higher altitudes, and then landed in Nevada. So we launched at Utah, it floated over to Colorado, and as it went up, it caught some high altitude winds that brought it back over to Nevada.
Cody, I just want to say, you are living the life that I want. Just throwing that out there.
I should finish my story before the
camera overheats. Well, what we're having, by the way, is overheating problems with the camera. Will, who is here helping us behind the camera, is actively trying to cool it down so that we can maintain the video.
So I saw earlier someone asked how I breathe the hydrogen. I had an old video where I breathed hydrogen. It's now down because I don't want to show things that unsafe on YouTube now that I'm so popular. But
price of fame.
The hydrogen I made, they asked if it was made with electrolysis, because if you put electricity through water and electrolyte, you can split it into hydrogen and oxygen. And that's one of the better ways of making hydrogen. It's just expensive.
Also depends on your electrolyte, kids. Please go on.
But actually at the time, I actually used aluminum and hydrochloric acid to make my hydrogen.
Oh.
So I would have a propane tank, an old propane tank. I'd take the top off. I'd put some chunks of aluminum down in there. It was just a cast engine block that I'd busted apart. And some dilute hydrochloric acid, screw the lid on, put it somewhere where if it blows up, it's not going to send shrapnel everywhere. Wait a week for the reaction to completely finish, and then I've got a tank full of hydrogen. I get like 100 PSI. It's reasonably safe, but still wouldn't recommend doing that.
No. The reason why I brought the electrolyte, by the way, just quick little safety thing, as long as we're talking safety, if you do want to create hydrogen through electrolysis, splitting water into oxygen and hydrogen, that is often done just by like little high school students or whatever, but it doesn't scale well if you're using table salt. A lot of people just add table salt, and start their
Make
electrolysis.
chlorine gas.
Yeah, table salt is sodium chloride. You can actually, while you're splitting up your water, split up your salt, and you end up with chlorine gas in your hydrogen or oxygen. Don't do that either.
You want something that's difficult to oxidize. So chlorine can be oxidized to its elemental state fairly easily. You want things like potassium hydroxide, where if you oxidize that, it just releases oxygen. Sulfuric acid also is a good one. This one I've been using for my electrolyte because it's, sulfur is already oxidized pretty much as far as it's going to go in sulfuric acid. And I actually like sulfuric acid better because it produces bigger bubbles and it doesn't foam as much.
Nice.
And you can use lead electrodes, which are fairly cheap and easy to make.
Okay.
So the balloon that I made, the space blankets,
Yes.
I designed it to go to about 9 miles in altitude, remember? So I had the space blankets, clamshelled together, and I put just a little bit of hydrogen in there to get it to lift. And the idea was that the little bit of hydrogen up in the bag would expand, and by the time it got big enough that it would be bursting size, it would be at 9 miles. It never got to 9 miles. I was tracking it with my telescope. The idea was that I would watch the bag expand, and you'd be able to estimate the altitude based on the expansion, assuming there was no leaks, which there almost certainly was. But as I was watching it, it got up to about the height of the mountains, and then the wind coming off the top of the mountains, it was very calm. It was a very calm day down on the ground, but once it got up to the height of the mountains, I guess there was some wind coming across it. It took off sideways, and it went off over another mountain range, and I lost sight of it. Some of my friends down in the town that it went over reported seeing it. And it actually went down, it crash landed in a field full of goats, and the goats partially ate the balloon. And I know...
The story just keeps getting better.
I know this because the goats were owned by my grandmother.
All right.
It landed in my grandma's backyard 60 miles away.
Of course it did. So preteen Cody makes a balloon out of space blankets and a bit of hydrogen,
which I made myself.
As one does.
Prompting a UFO scare in the nearby town, and it lands and is eaten by your grandmother's goats.
Yes.
This was already amazing.
And actually, a couple of balloons landed out near her. Apparently, the wind currents just take them, and it lands in that general area every time.
Nice.
And we have come full circle.
Indeed. Well, I feel like... Do we want to do some of the little stories? There's some little...
Like a lightning round?
Flight. Yeah, lightning round.
Right.
Should we do lightning round?
Maybe take more questions?
Yeah.
Tell you what, you watch the questions.
All right, I'll try to use this eye that's not melted.
I've got a story. Now, you start talking about people taking flight using lighter-than-air craft, and we end up with Lawn Chair Larry, who was the guy back in 82 who...
1982. Worth noting.
Okay.
We have covered a breadth of time.
Where plastic furniture wasn't just the domain of the super wealthy. And he ties, I forget, it was 40-something weather balloons to a lawn chair with the intention of, he's got his little pellet gun, and he's going to fly up into the air and float around, have a good time, shoot the balloons with his pellet gun, and drift softly to the ground. Now, he cuts his mooring line, and his...
It takes a lot of kahunas.
He has vastly underestimated the force being applied by the balloons, and he shoots up into the air like a rocket. He panics immediately. He wastes no time in panicking and starts shooting balloons with his pellet gun, trying to stop this mad dash into the atmosphere. Shoots too many balloons and starts crashing down. Throws out all his ballast. He had some gallons of water or whatever. He throws off his as ballast, also loses his gun, throws off too much ballast,
Wouldn't you,
and
like,
now he's
tether
heading up
that?
again. I don't think planning was this guy's forte. Though I do love...
Those weather balloons will take you way up.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Luckily, he managed to... They had to kind of get this whole air traffic control thing. He ultimately drifted into power lines and managed to ride down. And he... I love his quote at the end. The guy was a truck driver and obviously just a little bit insane. But I have to love him for his quote at the end. Right? Because he flies up, creates this whole incident, just hanging on for his life in this lawn chair in the sky. And later, as he actually survives the experience, he comes down and they ask him, "Why'd you do it?" And he said, "Well, you can't just sit around."
He did.
So I kind of have to love Lawn Chair Larry for that. And so there's one lightning round story. I've got one more, and then I'll pass it over to you two, whatever you want to do. Turns out, it is believed that he had an inspiration in Al Mingaloni. Let me just check. Al Mingaloni. This was way back closer to the time of the Hindenburg. And you had this photographer for Paramount who wanted to do this shot where he would have his camera, he had a harness, and was hooking himself up to weather balloons, and they were tied off to the bumper of a car. And they were just going to raise him into the ground, and he was going to take a picture from above, and maybe do like some little jumping, right? But they can't quite get it right, and they're only getting up a little ways, and he says, "Guys, I'm starting to chafe here. It's getting late. Just put on like 5 more balloons." They do so. He takes off, hits the end of the mooring line. The mooring line snaps.
Oh.
And Al is floating away. A bystander Catholic priest, Father Mullen, picks up a .22 rifle that was nearby, hops in with the 2 other cameramen guys, and they take off, following him in the car as he continues to float higher. He tries to climb up to the balloons to do something, I don't know, untie them or something. Cramps, loses his balance, or actually cramps, loses grips. He falls to the end of his harness, loses the camera, a.k.a. ballast. And ends up flying even higher. He flies up there for like an hour or 2 while they're chasing, and he says he suddenly hears this ping, ping. Here's 2 little pings, and all of a sudden he starts descending. Yeah, after a couple hours, which he had like disappeared behind cloud banks, these guys in the car are still hunting for him. They finally get him. He's about 700 feet in the air, and this Catholic priest shoots 2 of the balloons, allowing
good
him.
Shot.
I know.
Yeah.
I know.
Bold to take the shot.
with a guy dangling nearby.
I know. It was an amazing story, and yeah, he actually survives. They actually recover his camera. It is uninjured, right? These are back in the days where cameras were big, heavy, industrial type things, and yeah, he actually is saved. Al Mingaloni is saved by a random bystander priest shooting his balloons with a confiscated .22 rifle. That's going to be it for my stories. Let's say, Mike, do you have any lightning round stories you want to throw out?
I have one lightning round story. For those of you who were furious with me in the comments, let's talk about the Ghost Blimp real quick.
Ghost blimp.
World War II.
Ain't a ghost blimp.
A blimp called the L-8 or Love 8 is doing submarine patrol off of out of San Francisco, right, looking for Japanese subs.
Zeppelins were very good at that.
Yes, but this was a blimp. Just, little fella. Two-man crew. I don't remember the names. I didn't write down the names of the 2 sailors that are on board. They are out scouting for Japanese subs. They radio back that they have seen a suspicious oil slick, which was often a sign of a submarine. Excuse me. They go down to investigate. 2 ships see them come down. They drop lights and they drop all of the apparatus to look for submarines. They see them preparing a depth charge, but then they do not drop it. The blimp goes back up higher, floats away. It is seen by various people, but after reporting that they were looking for a submarine, the radio goes silent. The Navy assumes, since they've still got observers watching these guys, that they're having some kind of radio trouble. But after they say they're going down to look for the sub, if there is a sub, after they radio that they're going down to look for the sub, the radio goes silent. Blimp goes back up and flies around. It's seen near the Golden Gate Bridge. It is witnessed by someone that it is now partially crumpled, which means that it's having some trouble and that the crew is not doing what they're supposed to. People start to get concerned when it comes
carrying a bomb.
bearing down into a neighborhood.
Oh.
It crashes into a house and a telephone line and then deflates onto a car, the owner of which gets out and runs away.
Well, yeah.
So the owner of the car is not harmed. Emergency services converge, cut away all of the stuff, get to the gondola. The door is open. The crew is gone.
Like,
What?
it originally lifted off probably because it lost weight.
Could have been.
Like, fall out or jump.
Could have, yeah. There are several theories that one of them fell and the other tried to help him and then fell himself. That they died in a murder-suicide.
Oh, wow. That's dark.
That they were abducted by aliens. That they got so close to the water that the Japanese sub came up and yoinked them right out of the blimp. Personally, I think the aliens is slightly more likely than that theory. Or that at some point in all of this, they managed to get low enough that they were able to jump down and escape on foot. But then why?
Say, just...
Yeah,
that doesn't quite
just
track
just
either,
take
does it?
the blimp.
You own a blimp. If you can travel by blimp, do it.
So that is one of the kind of unanswered mysteries. It is called the Ghost Blimp or the Love 8.
Okay. All right. Cody, I know one question that multiple people have asked is, how you doing?
I think that's the same person multiple times.
Oh, I've seen it actually throughout. People have come on and asked, how you doing, Cody? So the public wants to know, Cody, how you doing?
How am I doing? I'm doing all right, I guess.
All right.
Better than I
Good.
deserve.
Cody's doing all right. Good to hear it.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. People did comment on the nice clean shave.
Figured I'd match, well, I guess.
Yeah,
Figured-
Mike.
Figured he'd ostracize that guy.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. Any other closing dirigible thoughts you'd like to make?
So something that I was wondering is the Hindenburg, was the gas, the hydrogen, was it dry or did it have water vapor mixed with it? I guess
I couldn't say.
yeah. I'd have to look that up.
I have to look up.
But,
I think it was dry.
is lifting gases, you can have things that are lighter than air, not just hydrogen and helium, but water is actually lighter than air in its vapor form. So if you have a moist air, moist hydrogen, it should increase the lifting ability because the water takes up space.
All right.
That's one of the reasons why we get clouds.
Well, that's true. That
Good point.
water vapor is lighter than air. Well, yeah. All right. Excellent. Yeah. Anything else?
I didn't have
good?
any stories prepared.
All right. No, it's all good. We had plenty. We've gone for nearly 2 hours now. I believe. Are you going to be joining us one more time next week? Yes.
If you'd like.
I would like. So that wraps up this story stream. Next week, we're going to have a different segment, Tell Me a Story. It's going to be about Cody. Tell Me a Story is where we pull the stories out of people. Last time we actually had Will, who's behind the camera today, as our artist, and that was a lot of fun. But it's going to be about Cody. So all of those who are wondering, how is Cody, we're going to go into more depth next week. So same time, 6:30 Mountain Standard Time next Thursday. All those things. Remember to like and comment, subscribe so you don't miss it. And of course, especially like Cody, he's able to do all of these crazy things because largely his Patreon people. So make sure you reach out and support us so that ultimately I can have my Sky Island. Let's be honest, right? That is what we're all going for here, right? Is my Sky Island. Anyways, so yes, we'll see y'all next week, and thank you so much for being here. Appreciate you.